The housing market has shifted. We are entering into a time that's much more favorable for buyers than it is for sellers. At least that's what it feels like right now. Are we going to experience another housing crash like we saw in 2008? Personally, based on the data, and we're going to go over that in this video, it feels much more similar to the 1980s, where affordability was much lower than it is today. Even though home prices were much lower, the median income was well under what it is today, and interest rates were much higher than they are today, leading to lower affordability than we're seeing in the housing market right now, even though the housing market is much less affordable than we've seen over the past decade. That combined with a lack of building the past 15 years or so since the great financial crisis puts us in a much different position than we were in 2008, at least from a housing standpoint. If you remember in 2008, people could were leaving their homes. They were walking away from the houses that they lived in because they could no longer afford to pay the mortgage, and it was much cheaper to find some place to rent. Today, rent is extremely high. Most people who have locked in at a 3, 4, 5% mortgage rate couldn't afford to walk away from that home and rent something smaller than where they're living in now. They couldn't afford to sell their home and buy back the same home that they have. So, what we have right now is an environment of people who, like the 1980s, are faced with these higher rates, much higher when they bought their home, and have less incentive to move out of their property compared to 2008, where there was rentals around. Landlords were preparing for months of vacancies while new tenants came in to fill their properties. It was a much more favorable time to just walk away from this mortgage payment that was weighing you down and go rent something that's cheaper and rebuild your financial life. Now we're in a much similar time to the 1980s, and we're going to talk about that in this video. Before I do, I'm Liam O'Reilly. I'm a realtor with Jerry Riley Real Estate. If you have any real estate needs, all of my contact information is in the description. Reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to help you. And let's get into it. We're going to talk first about this housing article, or this housing video, excuse me, from the Bay Area in the 1980s, and just listen to the similarities that this news broadcaster has, and compare it to what we're experiencing in the market right now. Let's take a listen.
Tonight on the 11 o'clock news, we'll have part 2 of the housing report. We'll analyze why prices are so high. We'll take a look at the high cost of financing and the high cost of permits these days, just getting the permit to build in the first place. We'll look at the average income and how that is so terribly out of sync with the average price of a home today.
You can't live with a subject this as long as you
Sounds
did
familiar,
and put together as many reports without really drawing some conclusions. One overriding thing coming out of this, optimism or pessimism from your standpoint?
I am really torn. I will tell you, first of all, that experts, very wise men and women who study this day in and day out, have very divergent views. Some of them are optimistic, some very pessimistic. It goes from people saying we are heading for a bust cycle, where prices will drop anywhere from 10% in the Bay Area to an average 30% all across the nation, to others being optimistic, saying we're going to swing around, interest rates will be back down to 12%, and housing prices will continue to rise by 15, 20% a year here.
How about on the fact that whether they go up or down, will the average
Listen to this next part too. Exactly what we're
any
talking
of us ever
about.
be able to get back into a home that we want, the old American
We're
dream?
going to see a big difference. I think in the 1980s, we're going to see housing as the political issue, really. Some people talk about demonstrations in the streets, maybe by as early as 1985. We are not going to have the single-family home as we do today. We're going to be moving into cooperative housing, and the first home will most likely be something of a condominium or cooperative nature, because...
And then move up from...
So in that video, there's a lot of the same topics, right? People can't afford to buy housing, that they're going to have to shift away from the single family home. One of the questions that she was asked right there, I kind of talked over it, was, will people ever be able to buy a home again, or will you rent forever? I mean, you see that all the time. At least I see that all the time in the news. You will rent and be happy is kind of this dystopian view, and that's exactly what they were talking about in the 1980s. And I'm going to leave this link in the description. You can watch that full news broadcast down below, but they talk about exactly what experts are talking about in the housing market today, from the divide that she mentioned, where some experts are predicting a massive crash and others are expecting, when rates come back down, housing prices are going to take off again. It's really a similar conversation to today. And she goes over the affordability, the contrast between the median income and where the median sales price is and where mortgage rates are, and how the monthly payment just doesn't add up for most Americans. It's the same thing where there's a ton of buyers who want to jump into homes, who want to purchase property, but they're just not able to. They can't afford it. And if we think back to 2008, it was the exact opposite. There weren't many buyers out there. There weren't many people who didn't own homes and wanted to purchase real estate. There was a lot of people who had bought real estate, were in over their heads, and wanted to get rid of their homes any way they could. They would just walk away and start renting. It's, in my opinion, it's a really different world than we are today. And we're going to take a look at some charts. And I know people have been talking about Airbnb and like, well, back in 2008, a bunch of people had secondary homes, and that was part of the crash was secondary homes from people that couldn't afford them, or just primary homes that people couldn't afford. And an argument that I hear a lot today is, what about Airbnb? What about all these Airbnbs when all of a sudden the market crashes and the economy crashes, people are going to be forced to sell their Airbnbs. But let's take a look at the data and see what we're talking about here when we look at active inventory. So this is current active inventory according to the Fed, or the Fred, which is the Federal Reserve of St. Louis. We're sitting at about 700,000 active homes for sale on the market. And when we take a look at what was going on back in 2008, this chart right here is the chart of active inventory leading up to the 2008 crash. So we see down here 2000 home prices, or the active inventory was around 2 million homes for sale at around 2000. That gradually increased to about 2.5 million active listings on the market by 2006, when this crash was starting. And then we look at the peak here in 2008, there were almost 4 million homes for sale on the market, 4 million active listings. So the ratio between, and at the same time, buyers all went away. So we had inventory shoot straight up as people couldn't afford to be in their homes, and we had all the buyers, there were no buyers left. Nobody wanted to purchase these properties. And we compare that to today, right? We have 700,000 listings, and we talk about Airbnbs. We go to AirDNA here, active short-term rental listings on AirDNA, this chart right at the top. Let me make sure you can see it here. You can't. Let me see if I can shrink myself so you can take a look at this right there. Active short-term rental listings, around 850,000 active short-term rental listings. And so if all those short-term rental listings were to come to the market, we'd have what, about 1.5, 1.6 million listings on the market. We're still well under that 4 million listing mark. So we just have so much inventory to go. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about how we've just underbuilt compared to 2008. We had all this building leading up until the 2008 financial crisis, and now we have underbuilt for almost a decade. So there's a ton of people sitting on the sidelines, just like there was in 1980, who want to purchase a home but can't afford to purchase a home. It's not like 2008 where we had a ton of inventory coming to the market and people were trying to get rid of their homes. They purchased too many homes. They overspent on their home. They have a larger home or a larger payment than they can afford. It's really a different fundamental market. And when we take a look at affordability, because that's a huge topic right now in the United States, when we talk about affordability, the ratio between the median income and the median sales price and mortgage rate. So if you were to put 20% down and purchase the median sales price, if you made the median income in America, would you be able to afford that property? And right now, the answer is no. 94 out of 100. So 100, if this was right at 100, that means if you made the median income and you went to purchase the median price home in the United States, then you would be able to afford it. That's what the 100 number means. So when we're at 94, that means that we're below that median number. The median income right now cannot purchase the median priced home in this country because of where mortgage rates are and where prices are. But how does this compare to the 1980s? When we look back at 1980, look at this. It was at almost 60. It was 30% lower than it is today, this housing affordability index. And what did we see with home prices when we look at median sales price? This is the 1980s right here, this little section. We didn't see it fall off a cliff. We didn't see it completely crumble like we saw in 2008. We saw relatively flat prices in the 1980s. Now, that doesn't mean, and something I'm going to be stressing a lot coming into the future, something that I've been stressing, is that doesn't mean you won't be able to find a great deal out there. That doesn't mean if you purchase a home, you can't overpay for it and get screwed. And if you have a short-term time horizon, you buy a home, even if you buy it right, you're not guaranteed to get money out of it, especially if you need to sell it quick. If you buy a home today and then a year from now you need to move across the country and you have 1 month to sell your home, well, yeah, you might be able to sell it for the price that you want. You might be able to get your money back out of it, but at the same time, if we're in the same market that we're in today, you might not find that buyer in the first month. The buyer might not be there. You might have to negotiate on inspection costs or on your sales price just to get it under contract and just to get it sold. And so you have to be smart with where you buy. You have to be smart with the home that you're buying, and you have to make sure you get it at the right price in this market, because there's not many buyers out there, just like the 1980s. So to sum it all up, based on what I'm seeing, we're nowhere near that 4 million active listing mark that we saw in 2008. We're much closer to the 1980s with low inventory, high interest rates, high inflation, low affordability, people struggling to get into homes. And in the 1980s, we saw relatively stable prices. That's what I'm predicting going into the future. Of course, our economy is vast. It's very complicated. There's a lot of other forces at play, and we're not in the same time period as the 1980s. So it might play out differently, but this is what I'm seeing. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I love hearing your perspective. I value it, and I learn a lot from you folks in the comments. So please leave a comment. If you have any real estate needs, reach out to me directly. Other than that, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.